Hello everyone, welcome to today's Dev Diary. It's me, Offe, one of the humans working on Stellaris.
Adjusting organizer.
Today, I will bring you an update from the Custodian AI initiative. Before we dive into today's Dev Diary, let's take a quick recap of the AI work that went into patch 3.3. If you have been following the AI Dev Diaries, you probably know that our main objective for the 3.3 Libra patch was to improve the economy management of the AI, especially with a mid and late game perspective in mind. The reason for this was to establish the AI empires as relevant actors beyond the early game and give their interactions with the player more impact. Following the discussions on our own forums and also on the Reddit, my favorite topic has been seeing people's reactions to AI empires suddenly having way more diplomatic weight in the galactic community, to the point that they are passing resolutions against the player's will. While the AI economy management still has areas which can be improved, we felt satisfied with the changes made in 3.3 to the point where we wanted to move our focus to other areas of the AI. As the AI economy improved, the other areas of the AI started to become more obvious targets for improvement, namely the AI military fleet management and their diplomacy interactions with the player. First, I would like to say that the changes coming to military fleet behavior in 3.4 are mostly bug fixes rather than straight up improvements to the decision making of the AI. So while there should be a very big noticeable difference, the work we made so far with the fleet behavior will not be as encompassing as the work made for the economy in the previous patch. Now, let's start with the elephant in the room, AI splitting their fleets into tiny pieces. While there were some issues where the AI would split their fleets too much, fundamentally this behavior was by design. The AI would allocate just enough fleet power, with a small margin, to be able to carry out their objectives. The main issue came from the fact that there are so many low fleet power targets in Stellaris, such as unupgraded starbases, which cause the AI to frequently split their fleets into about 1,000 fleet power pieces. In theory, this strategy can be quite good. However, there are two big issues with this approach. One of them is that the player can easily just take one of their fleets and go around and play whack-a-mole with the AI and defeat their small fleets one by one. This makes the AI somewhat incompetent and can be easy to defeat. And the other issue is that this isn't very fun to play against, leading to a lot of frustration from the players. In 3.4, the AI will aim to have full fleets as their smallest unit to carry out military objectives. AI will actively try and merge all possible fleets during peacetime and reinforce them to full strength, and the AI will be more proactive with merging fleets that have been damaged during a war whenever possible. One common cause for this was that the AI assigned several fleets to carry out an objective together, and the fleets would try to regroup with each other by moving to the system of the other fleets, causing them to switch places with each other over and over. In 3.4, the AI will be much better at gathering up their fleets in an orderly fashion when attacking. In 3.3, we made the AI obey the take point behavior again, but it didn't work quite as well as we wanted. For example, allied AI fleets would sometimes follow the player's fleets when they shouldn't. And there were also issues where the AI would suddenly change their mind and stop following the player all of a sudden. They would also not always follow the player with all of their fleets. In 3.4, you should see an improved take point behavior. During a war with several involved AI empires on the same side, one of the AIs will be considered leading the war. This may be an AI different from the diplomatic war leader, and the other AIs will put all of their fleets to try and follow this AI war leader. This suffered from a similar issue as previously mentioned, where the allied AI fleets, which were supposed to be following, would change their mind way too often and never reach their intended target. In 3.4, we're adding an AI war state, which becomes activated when the AI fights a mid or late game crisis. This state of war will continue until the crisis has been defeated. This means that AI will now enable their normal war behavior against targets like the Great Khan, even though they do not have a diplomatic war, if they or any of their allies get attacked. This has many consequences. For example, AI empires should now obey the player's take point when the player is fighting a crisis. Allied AI empires should now help each other fight crisis together when one of them gets attacked. AI empires will now seek out and destroy systems controlled by a crisis empire or pirates when they get attacked. We also addressed an issue where the AI empires would fight neutral targets such as a Leviathan during an ongoing war. In 3.4, we're adding a state of war preparation for the AI, which they will enter when they would have otherwise declared war immediately in 3.3. During this phase, the AI will gather all their available fleets and move them towards the border of their target. If you have enough military intelligence, you will be notified with an alert that all hell is about to break loose. And depending on how much intel you have, you may get a more accurate estimation of when the AI will strike at you. Now that we have covered the military changes coming into 3.4, let's go over the diplomacy changes. One of the biggest complaints regarding being in a federation with the AI has been the unrelenting bombardment of proposals of changing the same federation law over and over again, often resulting in AI empires stacking the negative opinion modifier to the point where they will leave the federation altogether. In 3.4, we are introducing a 10-year AI voting cooldown for each law category. So let's pick a random federation law to talk about. Free migration, perhaps. When the AI proposes to change this law, it will add a 10-year cooldown to every AI member of the federation. That means that each time you vote it down, it will take at least 10 years before anyone else will be able to propose it. This is only for AI empires and the player is unaffected. Coincidentally, this also fixes an exploit that the player could use against the AI federations, where the player would repeatedly ask to be voted into an AI federation. This allowed the player to repeatedly stack the negative opinion modifier between the AI federation members, often resulting in the whole federation breaking apart. Another common complaint regarding AI federations is how the AI would often not put any envoys into the federation at all. This was a symptom of a much bigger problem, which was the overall AI envoy usage. The AI empires would frequently reassign their envoys to the same task over and over, knocking out the envoy who was already assigned to it and starting their cooldown. As a result, the AI would often have all of their envoys on cooldown and not assigned to any task whatsoever. In 3.4, the AIs should be much better at handling their envoys, both in terms of federations, the galactic community, and as well as diplomatic actions such as improved relations or espionage operations. While the AI voting for seemingly completely irrelevant resolutions in the galactic community gave it a sense of uncomfortable realism, there were a few issues that stood out to us. The AI would sometimes propose resolutions that were completely against their core beliefs. For example, a slaver empire would sometimes propose to ban organic slave trading. This was due to a missing willingness check when the AI would propose a resolution. They would propose the one they liked the most, but they would never check if they ever liked it in the first place. The AI was also explicitly forbidden to withdraw their own proposed resolution. While most of the time this makes perfect sense, there are situations where this could be the best course of action. For example, the AI may propose to reduce the council size, but by the time the resolution is about to enter the Senate floor, their diplomatic weight might have been reduced to the point where they would propose themselves out of the Galactic Council. Similarly, the AI was also forbidden from opposing their own resolution, but the above situation could happen in a very similar way, where for example the player would be able to enact the emergency measure to move the resolution to the Senate floor before the AI has time to withdraw the resolution. In that situation, it would make perfect sense for the AI to oppose their own proposed resolution. Additionally, if you have enough intel on the AI, you will now be able to see why they are voting the way they are doing in the galactic community. While this tooltip was already quite big, I knew I could make it even bigger. While planet and sector automation isn't necessarily AI, we have seen a lot of requests for previous AI improvements to also be available for the player. And even though the planet and sector automations that the player use is a different system than the AI economy, we still felt that improving the system would hopefully add a lot of quality of life value to our players. The design philosophy for this new automation system is that most people will be able to use some parts of it when possible. So, the intention is not that all players will always use this feature, rather that everyone will find something that they feel is worth using. So, how does it work? In 3.4, the planet automation will have an additional settings UI where the players can toggle components on and off for each planet individually, as well as setting default values for newly colonized planets. The most impactful setting is this one, the designation setting. This will cause the planet to build new jobs in accordance with the designation when there are no free jobs available. This setting is now much more restrictive in regards to what is considered to be accordance with the designation than previously. For example, enabling this for a mining designation will now only construct the mining districts and the mineral purification plant, and nothing else. The other settings are amenities, build new amenity buildings, and also micromanage the priority of amenity producing jobs to minimize how many unnecessary amenities you have. This is using the same system as the AI has been using since 3.3. Rare resources. Build new resource producing buildings to target a +3 monthly income of all rare resources. Additionally, this will now take into consideration the empire-wide building queue, such that it will only build one additional building at a time. Pop assembly. Build new spawning pools, cloning vats, robot assembly, etc. Housing. Construct additional housing, either via districts or buildings when needed. Building slots. Automatically build a new housing district each time you run out of building slots. This is especially useful for automated planets such as the science designation, because they require many building slots. Crime. Build new crime prevention buildings when crime reaches dangerous levels. Clear blockers. Automatically clear blockers when it is preventing construction of new districts. Posthumous employment. Builds the posthumous employment center on all planets with a raw resource focus. And lastly, Psycorps. This will build the Psycorps building on all planets when possible. The designation automation setting is extra careful not to overbuild buildings and produce way too many jobs, whereas the other settings will build new buildings and districts even when there are no available jobs. All of the automation settings, except for the amenity automation, which uses specific AI behavior from code, are fully scriptable, and for anyone interested in making their own automation mod, the files can be found in the game, common, and colony automation and colony automation exceptions files. The path to these files are in the description of the video if you're interested. Sector automation is now a system built on top of the planet automation. Setting the sector focus will now change which designations planets will be able to select when they have the automatic designation selection mode enabled, and this is to respect the sector focus. Additionally, there is now a Unity focus available for sector automation, since Unity is now much more important after the 3.3 patch, together with a new Unity automation for planets to go along with it. The requirements to have an upgraded capital building in order to construct research labs and rare resource producing buildings have now been removed in order to make the planet automations function properly for newly founded colonies as well. We have also added several missing designations to different planet types in order to allow for more automations for the player. For example, Ring worlds can now use the factory and forge world designations, and hive worlds can now use the fortress designation. And that's it for today's dev diary. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below or in the Stellaris forums. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any Stellaris related information, and thanks for watching.